What's up, everybody? It is Wednesday, February 3rd. What's up? Market's flat today. No big deal. That happens. I want to talk a little bit about reserves, bank reserves today, because I think a lot of you have kind of the wrong understanding of reserves. When you hear people talking about it, a lot of times, they're printing money. They're printing money. Bank reserves go up as a result of government spending. Bank reserves can also go up as a result of Fed monetary operations, okay? Like when they buy assets, when they buy government securities, they'll buy the government securities, they'll credit bank accounts with reserves. So, banks do not lend out their reserves, all right? They may lend overnight to each other, but that only shuffles reserves around in the system. It's not the creation of, new money or new liquidity. There's only those two places that I mentioned, and it's really the one place, the only place that reserves can come from is the government. The consolidated government would be, the federal government, Treasury, and the Federal Reserve. That's it. I mean, that's the only place reserves can come from, and once they're in the system, they're not lent out. Again, they could be moved around from one bank to another. Let's say Bank A has an excess amount of reserves and Bank B needs additional reserves to meet, their reserve requirements. Bank A can lend to Bank B, and all that happens in that situation is just a change of ownership of those reserves. It goes from Bank A to Bank B. There has been no net creation of reserves or dollars or money in the system. The only way there can be net creation is, again, as I explained it, government spending adds to bank balances. And we've seen that very clearly in the pandemic stimulus last year. I mean, you saw that in personal savings, which went from like a few $100 billion to $6 trillion in a matter of a month. I mean, blew away any historical peak that we had seen previously. Now, personal saving down about 2.3 trillion, still an enormous by any historical measure. And that comes from net spending of the government. Deficit spending adds to the financial balances of the non-government. So that's the only place reserves can come from. They are not lent out, right? You hear this a lot. Oh, they're printing money. They're going to lend it out. We're going to have this explosion. As a matter of fact, it really has the opposite effect, because reserves are bank assets, and when reserves increase, that increases bank assets without a corresponding increase in capital, and that puts the bank leverage ratio, which is one of the regulatory ratios they have to comply with, that brings the bank leverage ratio down below thresholds that banks have to maintain, which means they have to deleverage. And a lot of times when you see these big reserve builds as a result, let's say, of government spending or Fed monetary operations, you see market corrections, all right? And this might happen because Treasury's talking about spending down the balance in their account for the first time in over a year. The balance is way up, like 1.7 trillion, 1.65 trillion. And they've announced a big reduction this quarter in Treasury sales. Remember, debt sales act as a reserve drain, right? The government spends, the money builds up in the banking system, then the government sells securities to drain some of those reserves. All right, you got to do that, first of all, just to maintain a level of reserves that's consistent with the Fed's target interest rate, And you also have to do that for the other reason I just mentioned. You know, if you're piling reserves onto banks, you could literally cause them to become insolvent. I mean, they would have to raise capital all the time if you just keep pumping reserves onto bank balance sheets, because, you know, that's the nature of the regulatory structure right now. So, you know, maybe it's a little bit complicated. I'm just bringing this up to try to clarify. You know, people have been asking me about this, so I wanted to tell you. Anyway, I talk about this a little bit more on my podcast today. I don't know if I mentioned that. I did post a new episode of my podcast today. You can get it by going to the link right here in the description below in this video. Check it out. And of course, don't forget, you know, you're going to learn a lot more about this stuff. Sign up for a 30-day free trial of MMT Trader. Get informed, get knowledgeable, get mental game, and get money. All right, everybody. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.